Good morning, Megan. Thank you so much for being here today on Known and Trusted. Where do we find you today?
Well, I hail from Midland, Michigan.
And what is something that draws you to being part of the conversation about hindsight and turning that hindsight into foresight?
Well, I have personal experience with being groomed and abused by an educator, but that is something that I did not come to have any understanding or awareness of until I was in my 30s.
So, can you explain or describe what life was like before the grooming began?
Sure. So I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and I was the child of two of divorced parents, but they had both remarried. So I had two moms, two dads, and I was a very confident kid from a very young age. I was told how smart I was, how talented I was. I loved attention from adults. I loved communicating with adults, and I wanted to be one. I wanted to get to do all of the great things that they got to do. And so from a very young age, I sort of felt like I connected with adults, um, sometimes more than people my own age, although I did also connect with people my own age that, fit my personality. But I was involved in church. I attended the Salvation Army, which is heavily involved with music. And so I played in the brass band and I was in a lot of student leadership things. I attended church and music summer camps. I was very active in the performing arts sort of sector. And I just felt like life was really good. I trusted people inherently, which is, part of the name of your show. So this is perfect, but I don't know that if anybody said, you should obey authority, but I think there was this idea that we obey God and that God appoints people to positions based on their gifts, right? So if your gift is teaching, you should become a teacher. If your gift is caring for people, you should be in the medical field and things like that. And so I also had this belief that everyone is sinful. We are all sinful by nature, but that we're all doing our best and that we are redeemed through Jesus Christ and God. And so when I met people in positions of authority, like teachers, I inherently trusted them. And anything they did that I would have marked as being strange or out of, wow, that one teacher, I can think of several teachers growing up where they would say and do things that we just thought were funny or wild, right? But it was always within this boundary of, but they're still a good person. They're just like really, they just may be a little bit crazier or more off color than some people, but nobody is out to hurt another human being. So that was my belief system growing up.
I love how you describe this, what sounds so warm and caring and nurturing. I think when people think of this subject and they think of harm towards children and grooming, they think this only happens in circumstances where children are vulnerable in very obvious ways. And I'm really compelled by your story because of all of the caring adults that you did have wrapping around you through the church, through music, and through your home and school life.
Yeah, it's a lot of adults around me that loved me, cared about me, but few to zero adults that are prepared to identify predatory behavior and know how to deal with it accordingly. So, and that's a separate thing, right? Is that you can care for someone, you can love them and want the best for them and not understand what the best thing for them actually would be. And again, going back to religion, and I can share this part. This is someone else's story. This is my mother's story, but I write about it in my book Dissonance, and I had permission to talk about it. But generational trauma, generational things can be passed down. So my mother is a victim of assault, child assault. She was assaulted multiple times as a young person by adult men. Um, and she, as an adult, was violently raped in her apartment when I was an infant. So when we were alone in the apartment. So my mom has experienced both coercive type assaults, but then also something that you could very clearly say, well, that's rape. And I think for her, in her mind, that's assault. She can clearly point to what happened in the apartment as being assault. But the other things that happened were diminished, and not because her parents were, I mean, they were wonderful people. My grandparents were they were such good people, but my grandfather especially was very much about, I don't want to spread more pain. He felt like
Mm.
his duty as a Christian, he wanted to protect people and to stand up for what he believed in, but he also was not equipped to understand that a man that would assault his daughter was not making a mistake. And so by not making that man's life worse by telling his family, because it's like, well, I'm not going to ruin this man's life over this mistake. Fast forward to my mother being an adult and having her teenage daughter come home and say, my band director kissed me at school. And my mom asking me, "Are you okay?" Just like her dad asked her, "Are you okay?" And she said, "I'm okay. I'm okay." It's not like we had sex, right? This is what my mom was thinking is, well, he might have kissed me or grabbed me, but it didn't get any further than that. So when I tell my mom that my high school band director kissed me, she asks, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah," because for me too, I was in love with my high school band director. That's what I felt like was happening. So of course I was okay. I was more than okay. But then she also said, I'm not going to ruin a man's entire life over one kiss. Because my mom also didn't understand that this is never an isolated incident. This isn't a mistake when an adult actually engages with a young person, with a child, with a teenager, with even a young adult, a person in power doing that. That is a choice that they are making. And the young person, the person on the receiving end of that of coerciveness, grooming, abuse, feels like they're making a choice if they want this to happen, right? They feel like I'm acting consensually and I want this, but they don't realize that the power imbalance and the influence that that adult has over them has seduced them into feeling this way. And so you're living in two different realities. The abuser and the abused are living in two separate realities, but the person being abused believes they are sharing the same reality.
I really like the way you frame that. This week's episode of the podcast, I talk about the idea that when survivors look back on what happened, they often think, well, everything that was positive about that interaction must have been bad. And I think it is so complicated, and you walk through that nuance very well in your book, Dissonance, which everybody should check out, and even in your testimony today. And I think one thing that comes up when I listen to your story is that the adults around you, it was as if, this is not a moral failure of adults around you. This is a lack of understanding and a lack of a skill set. And what hopefully is being done through shows like this and through the work that you're doing is building a skill set in adults who work with children, who are raising children, who maybe pray and are in congregations with children, recognize what the pattern looks like so that it can be observed and intervened or interrupted.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think the only moral failure is the person who's doing the abusing, who is fully aware that they are trying to take control of another human being, and they're doing it anyway because they're acting out of their own self-interest. And that's not to say that other people that fail to step in aren't making bad decisions or aren't just afraid, right? Like they know something's wrong, but they're afraid. But again, the more of us that talk about this and the more of us that come together and say, we will not stand for this, then you don't feel like you're alone when someone comes to you and shares something with you that you go, then say to yourself, well, what do I do with this information now? Or how am I going to be punished if I try to do something about it, which is a very valid fear. So you feel like in order to help someone else or to even help yourself, if you're the person being abused and you're aware that you're being abused and you're seeking help for it, that you almost have to prepare yourself for, well, what other bad thing is going to happen to me in an effort to try to save myself from this situation because you know that the people around you aren't prepared for this or maybe don't have the courage to do what's right. And so you end up with trauma upon trauma. It just becomes layered because then you become betrayed by people that you need to protect you, that you want to protect you, that you need their help because it is not fair to expect children to defend themselves from adult predators. We can equip them with tools to help them to set boundaries or help them to recognize things so that they can go to an adult, but it really depends on another adult who has the power to do something to protect that child. And you can tell me if, I mean, you're the more the expert in this. I'm an expert through lived experience and I've done research on it, and of course read your book, but you can tell me if that's an unfair perspective to take.
No, I think you're right on. I think that sense of agency, right? We sort of have placed and we've seen through all the social emotional learning programs that have been rolled out in a really well intentioned way through schools across our country that little by little, the narrative is on what the child did. And you spoke about it so well that this concept that a child walks through the world, hopefully, feeling as if they are self possessed, that they have that sense of self efficacy or agency. And I think one of the components of abuse in the patients that I work with is that sense of trusting yourself again, trusting your voice again, trusting your read of the situation or your instincts, if you will. And grooming does not necessarily solely work on instinct. It sort of covers up what would otherwise be alerted by our instincts because it is nice and it is kind and it starts off sweet. So I think the imperative for adults and for people in this line of work is not only to recognize that the individual who is behind the behavior is solely responsible for those actions, but that a child needs to be reminded by caring adults around them that the adult's responsibility is to take it to the next level through the justice system, through reporting, through all of the other advocacy that only adults possess because we have full agency through our adult wisdom and the fact that we have bank accounts and car keys and ownership in a way that a child will never have that ownership. And that part of the reason predators pick children is because they are more easily manipulated.
100%. Yes.
So, why don't we start with how you were introduced to the individual who harmed you in the end? How did that person come into your life?
I met this person when I was toward the end of my 8th grade year. I was on the cusp of my 14th birthday, and he was visiting our middle school to audition 8th grade band members for the high school bands. And I was very ambitious. I was like, I'm going to skip the intermediate band and I want to be in the advanced band with the juniors and seniors. And again, I had been playing for a long time. I was just like, again, I wanted that validation for myself, and I wanted to be recognized for the things that I could do, which now I'm having to undo in my adult life, is to feel that I have inherent value, that my value comes from a place that is deeper than what I can achieve, what I can do for myself or other people and things like that. So that's its own sort of, you could make an entire podcast on that, on self-worth. But again, I was very confident, but I also, I'm a trumpet player, and even though I was a really good player for my age, I would get very nervous playing alone, playing solos. And for whatever reason, when I was with this man, I played really well that day, and I felt confident around him. I felt a connection with him right away. I just really liked him right away. And I was placed in the advanced band. I was actually placed. Yes, I know, right? So it's like, woo, so exciting. So I was just like just a small group of incoming freshmen that was put in the advanced band. And not only that, but I was placed second chair in the trumpet section out of, I think there were probably 8 of us, somewhere like that, something like that, because we weren't a giant, giant school, but we weren't small. And so here I am, a freshman trumpet player sitting next to a senior, a first chair trumpet player, and there were challenges that we were allowed to have. So we were invited to challenge the person above us. And I challenged the senior and I ended up winning. And I thought this would make me feel really good, you know? And now, of course, I look back and I think to myself, if I were him, if I would have been in that position as an educator, if it was close, if our playing abilities were very close, I would have kept the senior in first chair, because you do want to be fair and you definitely want to put your best player. If there's an obvious difference between the two, but looking back, she was a very good player. And my thought is that the difference in our playing ability was not drastic, was not so, I won't know for sure, but this is why grooming is so bad, because it makes you go back and question, what did I really earn? And what was I given because it was going to actually benefit the person who was giving me that gift, what I thought was
Their
a gift.
agenda.
Their
Yeah.
agenda. Is it serving
What was
their
his agenda? Yes.
Yes. And so then I also auditioned for the spring musical as a freshman. And of course, so many of us dream of getting the lead, but you're thinking, I'm a freshman. How am I gonna do that? And I ended up getting the lead. Now, to be fair, which again is so exciting. Now, the girl that would have gotten it, I am aware of this, is that the girl that would have gotten this role, she was not able to take it. This is my understanding through the grapevine, is she was not able to take it because she had a physical challenge, because she'd been in a car accident that had harmed her leg. So she couldn't dance. She had a fabulous voice, but she wasn't able to do what the dancing that was required for the role. But for them to then go past all of the other juniors and senior girls that were talented and then give me that role. So now here I am as a freshman, and I'm paired opposite as a love interest with a junior boy. And not only was I in a school system with one predator, but I was in a school system with multiple. So my theater director, I will never forget that after I got this role, he invited me and this junior down who was playing the male lead to practice this scene where I needed to be lifted up in the air. And the show is Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, if anybody in your audience knows what that is or cares about what that is. And so he's like getting ready to ask me to marry him. And it's wild because he's only just met me, but he's looking for a wife so he can take the wife back and actually care for him and his 7 brothers. That's the whole thing, is like she thinks this is romantic and this man is sweeping her off his feet, and he's looking for a wife to do the work, take back and do this way. It's crazy. So anyway, we work on this scene where he lifts me up. And again, the theater director, I've never done any of these things. And I've never really had boys touching me like in theater in a role. And my theater director just takes his hand and just puts it directly onto my waist, puts his hands onto my waist, physically takes my hands, puts them up onto the boy's shoulder. And I am just like lighting up inside, because yes, it's theater, but my feelings are real. The way that I'm reacting to this interaction with this boy is very real. And so then there was a kissing scene that happened right after he lifts me up and spins me around and sets me back down. Excuse me. And then, so I said to my theater director, well, how do we make it look like we're kissing? And the theater director said, well, you just kiss. And I was looking at this boy thinking, this cute junior is going to really kiss me right now? Like, this is a lot. But also I'm thinking, I'm in high school now. And, to me, I interpreted this as, this is a challenge to show I'm mature. This is an opportunity for me to not make a big deal out of the fact that I'm getting ready to kiss this boy, not realizing that actually it is a big deal that they're making me do this, but for a different reason, that this is being allowed to happen. So this boy, he kisses me, and within seconds, I'm like, what is happening? Because I just like feel something like wet in my mouth. This is just like, I know that's so gross to say, but I realize like this boy has just stuck his tongue in my mouth. And I like pull back and I say this, I'm like, he just stuck his tongue in my mouth. And you can see on the boy's face that he's like, uh-oh, like he could tell from my reaction, because this was I really want to say that by all accounts, everything I know about this boy, who is now a man, he's a good person at heart. He really is. But he was in an environment where he was allowed, encouraged, whatever, as a teenage boy to do things he shouldn't have been doing. So when I said this, I thought the theater director would be shocked. He'd be like, "Oh my gosh, he did what?" But instead he laughed. And like he just thought it was so funny. And then the boy apologizes to me, but he does it in character still. He's got like this backwoods drawl. So he's like, "I'm sorry, Millie, I won't do it again." Like, it was just so crazy. And I wanted him to feel okay. So here I am coming back to being the nurturer, the forgiver, which all of those things were instilled in me, both culturally about being a woman, about being a female, but then also about being a Christian, about, oh, he made a mistake. I need to forgive him. He's saying he's sorry. And so I did. I said, it's okay. And I wanted to put him at ease and make him feel comfortable. So just crazy. And my theater director eventually ended up getting fired through some. And I won't give it away because I really want people to buy Dissonance and read about this, because I think people that have read this go, no way, this really happened. And it's like, it really happened. And so this man was so blatantly inappropriate, the theater director, that I could not recognize that my band director was being inappropriate, because he was not making dirty jokes. He was not asking me to put inserts in my bra so that I look more like a woman for a show. Like, it was, I never saw him as being somebody I should have feared or been worried about. And even when the theater director was let go, we weren't really talked to about, predatory behavior. It was like, I thought he was let go because he had said he'd made a mistake. He had said a very bad word to a lot of students. He had asked a very specific question, which was very inappropriate. And I thought that was why he was let go. We did not get into adults, or if we did, I have no recollection of being told teachers should never behave this way with you. This is how things should be. I think they wanted it to go away. They fired him. And then it was like, he's not allowed on school grounds. I do remember that, and telling us that he should not come near the school. But other than that, I don't have any, it wasn't a moment of education for me. Let's put it that way. So my relationship, this theater director was literally fired in the same semester as then I was assaulted right at the end of my sophomore year. It was one day after my sophomore year ended. I was 1 month into being 16 years old when this happened. And what had escalated, my relationship with my band director was escalating. It was getting more and more intense over that spring semester of my sophomore year. There were more and more things happening, all the way up into he was inviting me to his apartment to have lunch with him before a band performance. And he didn't touch me at all while I was at his apartment. He didn't, not once. And he had touched me, like he'd put his hand on my shoulder. He had no problem getting in my space. But that particular instance, he kept enough distance where I'm thinking to myself, well, he really clearly does have feelings for me. He invited me here, but he's being safe, because as long as nothing physically happens between us until I'm out of high school, then he can't, we haven't done anything wrong. And so he actually waited. He had these opportunities outside of school to do something, but he waited until we were in the band room office. I had come to help out. He asked me to come look at some music for the next year, and he was leaving for a new job. So he's packing up all of his stuff, and I'm in the office, like, praying to God that he'll admit he has feelings for me before he leaves, so that I know he's waiting for me. And then before I know it, this man's hands are on my shoulders, and he's massaging my neck and my shoulders, and he's like speaking to me in this lulling, hypnotic sort of way. And I feel like intoxicated. I mean, now that I've, as an adult, had alcohol and I know what it means to be intoxicated, this is exactly what it felt like. Like the world was just foggy and your body is just filled with all of these feelings. And then he spun the chair around and he started making out with me, basically. And I was in such shock that I literally opened my eyes while his mouth was pressed to mine, like thinking to myself, is this real? And his eyes were closed. So it to me felt genuine. Oh, he's really into this. Like his eyes are closed, you know? And so to me, in that moment, I thought all my dreams are coming true. This man really does love me. I interpreted that moment as being love, as being care and affection, as being a confession of love for me, and that he couldn't wait. In my young mind, I thought he could not help himself but take it to the next level. And of course, I know today that that is not true, that he was very aware of what he was doing. And even if he was an adult who felt like, I can't help myself, then you shouldn't be in the classroom. If you feel like you're going to engage with a student in this way and you're like convincing yourself that it's okay because you have genuine feelings for them, because I know that there are teachers that have felt that way, or they've at least said that that's how they felt and that it was an impulse control, it's still wrong. It's still wrong. It is never in the best interest of that student for you to do that to them. It's damaging. And so, yeah, regardless of whether it's impulse control or that you really are in full control of what you're doing, it's wrong. And so he started this relationship with me, this physical relationship that lasted for years. And he was at other schools, but we continued to stay connected. I mean, and I stay connected. I say stay connected because I always saw it as being there's two of us in this situation. Now I know that's not true. There was me and there was him, and he was always acting alone. There was never an us, you know, even though I thought that that's what it was. It was always him taking control of me and doing what he could to keep me under his control and his under his power. And so he wouldn't have to worry that I would ever report him. I didn't even know it was a crime. And that takes us really to my 30s, right? Is that I go on with my life eventually. I get married, I have children. And one day I find out in 2019 that this man that I have all this history with has been arrested for child sexual abuse and pornography. And it was highly traumatic. And now I can make this connection. I could not make it back then. When he first kissed me, when he put his mouth to mine and he was making out with me when I was 16, and he pulled away from me and my body separated from his, I started violently shaking. Like, I mean, I was like, I remember looking at my hands and I was making sounds, but I couldn't string words together to make sentences. And I thought at the time that I was just so overwhelmed with emotion. You know, that's what I thought was happening, was that this was just so much for me emotionally. And that's why my body reacted that way. But then when I saw his mugshot as an adult, my body did the exact same thing. Is that when I read this article, I began to convulse, and my body had only acted that way in very specific circumstances, had like begun to shake in such a way, and for just to feel like I have no control of my body. And now I can see that those two are very connected to each other. So I found out, you know, basically within a span of 24 hours that I had been a survivor of rape for almost 20 years without any awareness of it. And that information alone was not enough for me to believe it. I couldn't, because my brain had already been wired to believe a certain thing. I'd already been groomed to believe that this man was a good man and that everything we had shared was born out of this organic development into this more, you know, into a romantic relationship, if you will.
And that it was real.
Yeah.
Everything, when I listen to you, I can completely picture a teenage girl believing and feeling all the real that you convey in that story. One thing that I think our audience would really benefit from is looking back, what would somebody who is outside of the dynamic between the two of you, what could someone have noticed, whether it be your parents, your other teachers within the school, your peers within the classroom? Is there anything that when you look back, now that you have all of this wisdom and incredible insight, what could you share with the listeners about what other people could have been uh, alert to?
My mom has said to me, and I think she might have even mentioned this back then, that he never engaged with her. Like she would show up to band stuff. I remember specifically we had a gig at the local mall. And I mean, it feels so big to high schoolers, right? But like we played at the mall, and I remember us leaving, and my mom was like, he never talks to me. Whether she said that back then or she just recognizes it now, I can't remember quite. But she can now reflect on that he never talked to her. He never said, I'm so proud of Megan. Megan did this. He kept his distance from her. He did not develop a relationship with her. And so on the opposite end with grooming, it's almost like predators live in the extremes where they're either completely isolating over here, like he did not want to engage with my parents at all, but he engaged with me, like I felt we were in this special world. But then in so many stories you hear that predators get really close with the family members so that they become trusted members, almost like family sometimes, right? But so in those extremes of either a teacher that does not want to engage in any way or showing some sort of like antisocial behaviors in a way, but that your child is very drawn to them and that they're really engaging socially with your child, but not with you at all.
That
Not to say
disconnect.
that disconnect of, well, they're not telling me how proud they are of my child, but they're telling my child how proud they are. So I think those extremes of either someone who is getting so close and so embedded that they're making themselves almost like inextricable, like a part of your family, but then also on the opposite end, developing zero relationship with you, showing no interest in speaking to you whatsoever, but showing high interest in your child. I think that is something to pay attention to. A woman that worked as a teacher's assistant who was also the mother of one of my peers, a wonderful human being that today she looks back and says, I remember the way that you talked about him. You would bring him up randomly, like in English class. In a totally different class, she said she remembered the way that I would talk about him and she wondered like, like it just set off some sort of alarm bell. But then she thought, oh, but it's fine. Like maybe she has a crush on him, whatever. But nobody was thinking this is dangerous. We need to all be aware of this imminent danger. And then there's just more obvious things of knowing where your child is and what they're doing and what their relationship is with adults who are in positions of power over them. Where are they? Where are they going? I told my mom that I was going to his apartment. Now, I told her a half truth. I said that we were having this farewell to seniors lunch at my teacher's house. Now, so that was not true. But I was going to his apartment because I wasn't a child that I didn't lie. I mean, it wasn't that I had never lied. I'm not going to say that. I had told lies and things like that. But I overall was an honest kid who wanted to tell the truth. And the only time when I was willing to tell a fib was when I felt like there was something that I wanted so badly that I had to have it, that I was willing to compromise these other things. And I was able to justify it in my child brain why that was okay because I needed for this other thing to happen. And so getting to spend time with him one-on-one, he took me to dinner after school one day. Like I said, I went to his apartment. He drove me home after an event. So there were all of these things. And of course, like I told you earlier in this interview, that I told my mom that he kissed me. So if you have an open line of communication with your child and you're talking to them and asking them questions, I think more often than not, you're going to get answers. You're going to figure it out. But the thing was, my mom ignored because she wasn't equipped, not because my mom doesn't love me. She does. But, she knew a lot of stuff and she was always pushing it off. Like I thought something might have been wrong, but I didn't want to believe that that was true. I didn't want to believe that that was true. And we were also living in a time, the early 2000, the early aughts where girls were looked at as being, women, like looking at Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, all of these teenage girls that were treated like they have come of age and now they are free game for adult men to comment on them, to, it was just like accepted. Like, okay, well, you're close enough to being a woman, so you know what you're doing now. And we know better now. We have so much knowledge about brain science and things like that. The brain is not fully developed until your mid 20s. Like, it's crazy to think that a 16-year-old is now fully ready to engage with whoever on whatever she wants to do. That is wild and it's wrong. There's no evidence that supports that whatsoever. That is a societal stigma and belief that is hurting children even to this day.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I wonder about your friends, because as you and I have had many conversations about the grooming process, one of the things that keeps coming up is this pattern of behavior, that it's often multiple victims. Did you and your friends ever discuss this person and how he was possibly doing some of the same similar things? Or did you really feel like in that school at that time that you were the chosen favorite?
Well, I told my best friend when the physical relationship started, I told her right away. She was the first person I drove to her house immediately after leaving the high school the day that he had assaulted me. I'll just call it what it is, now. But here I am, and I remember Whitney Houston was on the radio and I was singing, and I remember just just beating my hand on the steering wheel to the beat. It was like a movie in my head is what it felt like. And of course, when we're young, everything feels so big to us. And so now imagine that your teacher has just made out with you. Like, it's just this man that you feel like you are desperately in love with and would do anything for. And you think you're getting everything that you've ever wanted. And so I went to her house, I told her, and she was concerned. I mean, she said, "I'm happy for you, Meg, but he's your teacher." And I said to her, technically, he's not my teacher anymore because he was leaving. And so she was uncomfortable with it. And it did put a little bit of distance between us. I mean, that's part of the isolation piece, is that you start choosing that adult that's abusing you, like, because you feel like you've never felt this way about anybody. And it's true, because an adult doing these things with you, your body is not equipped to, I mean, it feels so euphoric. So you're getting these highs that you can't get with a boy your own age or girl your own age. And so felt like, well, I'm going to choose him. I'm going to choose him. And so she knew, but she also, it wasn't fair to her all she knew I was in love with him. And I think she hoped too that he was in love with me, that it was real. She wanted to believe this is real. It's weird. This is weird that this is actually happening, but I don't want to hurt my friend. I mean, imagine your best friend going and telling, like feeling like you're going to ruin her life. And that one of those things about feeling like if you tell somebody what somebody else is doing, that you're responsible for ruining those people's lives, when that is not true. It is the person who has made those choices. And the only person that was making those choices with real agency was my teacher. So the other thing to mention is that it was rumored around the school that my band director had a weird relationship with me, that he was too close to me. It was very obvious to students. They would say, "Mr. Blackmer clearly likes you." But see, that's the language they would use, was "he likes you," not "Mr. Blackmer is dangerous. I think he's going to hurt Megan," because none of us were taught that this is what this really is. Instead, it became that, oh, he likes you, he has a crush on you, and then jealousy would ensue from other students. Well, I'm sure people thought that's why she's getting drum major, or that's why she's getting this. And even though the students voted me in as drum major, but I think it was clear that people could read who he wanted to be the drum major. I mean, he put me in positions that put me out front, in front of people. And so it was very obvious. You talk about how these predators are not criminal masterminds in your book. Like, basically, like, it's not like you can't see what they're doing. It's just that you don't know what to look for. That's it. So because all these people knew there was a weirdness in our relationship, but they never saw it as Megan is in danger. That was never. Instead, it became teasing behind my back. And like I said, and just jealousy and isolation from people, and me missing out on friendships because people didn't want to get close to me because they were like, this is weird. Like whatever's going on with Megan and Mr. Blackmer that's not something they wanted to be near. And so that robbed me of friendships that I could have had when I was young as well.
Yeah, the point you made right at the start of this interview, that concept of isolation that I come back to again and again in my work. The isolation exists from the standpoint of isolating a child from their caregivers. But during that favoritism stage, it really is about isolating that child from their peer group so that the peers will say, oh, we're not going to look any further into this, or we're not going to get close to this child or this peer. That person is sort of outside of the realm of where we are. And that's on purpose. So I think it's really so informative when you talk about leaving. I can just picture that young girl, exuberant, gleeful, driving to her best friend's house, and the weight on your friend to think, well, I don't want to crush her dreams because something that she's really wanted to happen has happened, but I think this may not be right, or this may not be in her best interest, and this doesn't sound like the way that a teacher should treat a child. And hopefully in today's day and age, parents and families are having conversations like this so that a child, because that's often the one who gets given that bit of information, that secret is often passed to a peer, emboldening them to recognize, I can go and tell my parent, I can go and tell another administrator or another teacher at the school. What do you think is different now than before? When you think about, I know you work closely in schools and with children and youth, what do you think has changed, if anything, about the way that adults or older kids interact with younger kids when it comes to protection and safety?
This is really, I think, a twofold answer that has to do with how young people are more aware of things than we were when we were young. Younger, we're still young.
So
And
yeah.
still young, but then also how adults continue to act with young people. So, first off, I want to start with the fact that my children know what gaslighting is. They know words like gaslighting and grooming, and I didn't know any of those words. And so I think through social media, honestly, I mean, this is one of the positive things. There's so many negatives and challenges with social media, but I think one of the positives is that the messages can spread very quickly. Again, this can be a good or a bad thing. But our children, this young generation is much more aware that people, number one, are willing to manipulate you, that there are people out there that will do that, because also there's more sharing going on. There are people that are telling their stories, which is great. And so I think that there's just a much higher awareness about manipulation and about these different tactics that we didn't know anything about as younger people. And that's even in the past 5 years, that increase of awareness has just shot up so much. But also, with the way that adults treat students, I think because everyone is more aware, I think that is just true. I think in general that everyone, as our society as a whole, is more aware of how these things are happening, especially right now, talking about all the Epstein class, and all of that has really revealed these abuses of power and how adults are doing evil things to children that we couldn't even imagine. Because we don't want to believe it, because genuinely good people don't want to believe that someone else could be capable of doing such things. But then I think there still is this gap between there's this gap of people that just, I don't know. They're just they continue to go on and behave. I'm thinking of myself. Like as a good person, as a good educator, a person that cares legitimately about students. I look at myself prior to 2019, and I think about some of the things I did and said these were not actions I took because I'm a predator, but they are actions that I look back on now and think I never would have done that, because now I see the world in such a different way. And I think in so many cases, it takes a personal experience of some sort to really open your eyes to how your actions as an adult affects students. And I'll just bring up a very specific example that someone I think a lot of people wouldn't even think about is that teachers who transport their students, like as music teachers, for instance, we go on trips with our students. We go places that a math teacher isn't going to go, on field trips with their students. And so students have been in vehicles with their teacher. So whoever is sitting up front in the passenger seat, there is a psychological thing. And I'm not saying that every child is going to think this way, but I know that I would. Or if you're a teenager who's awakened in that way and you're looking at romantic relationships and you feel, you're developing your sexuality, that there are these underlying messages of, oh, I'm sitting in the front seat where this teacher's wife normally sits, do you see how that dynamic is like, it's even the student sitting in the front seat, the passenger there's this sort of like, I'm more equal now because I'm sitting up front. And so when my husband has to drive around students they do something called Singing Valentines, where they get in these groups and they go travel and do little, songs and they deliver them. He will always have a vehicle full of teenagers, and sometimes they're females, and he'll have a female that's sitting in the passenger seat, and he's very, very aware of how he does not want to act like she's the special one up there with him in the front.
The chosen
chosen
promoted
one. Yeah, the chosen promoted one, in that he's involving everybody and that everything is open. It's not we're in the front seat having a little conversation. And so again, are these things people would even think about if they hadn't been in this situation? No, they would not, So I just think the more that we can keep talking about our personal stories and keep sharing, just keep getting the word out that, yeah, these things do matter and they do affect children. And while children are malleable, because I'm thinking of an adult right now that said to me, well, children, about phones, about children being young and having phones. And I shared a concern about this child having a phone too young, that this adult said to me, oh, they're flexible. They learn how to adapt. Yes, it's very true that children can adapt, but children still, it doesn't mean that they're capable of taking on things that are their mind is still developing. So yeah, we need to give them agency and independence to grow, but we have to do it in a way that is appropriate to their developmental stage, and not just say, well, they'll get over it. They're children. Oh, you drop a baby, their brain will heal. It's just like crazy stuff. We still have to be responsible because we are the adults. And yes, they need independence, but when you see something as a child, you can't unsee it. If your brain doesn't know how to make sense of it, the fact that an adult man kissed me, that had his hands on me and kissed me, and my body reacted by convulsing, that just proves, like, if I would have been an adult woman and that would have happened, I wouldn't have started shaking. I would have been excited if I liked him, you know what I mean? If we were out on a date or developed feelings for him, but it would not have made me convulse. I have never convulsed after kissing somebody, only him. And so is that helpful? Because I feel like it's so easy to go in so many directions with these conversations, and you feel like you want to cover everything. You want people to know as much as possible. But I think just having the awareness, having enough information to keep your eyes open and trust people. I mean, I say to people, I trust you until I have a reason not to. The difference with me today is that I'm able to recognize much more quickly the red flags that would lead me to not trust somebody, whereas I wouldn't be able to recognize them before. And that's why I continued to trust people that I should not have been trusting.
And as I listened to your commentary about 2026 and where kids are and where people who are in youth serving activities find themselves, it's a little bit of the adults I talk to say, well, you can't ever touch a kid and you can't talk to them and you can't, I feel like I'm always on edge. We know that predators behave differently in the way that they act and the way they interact with kids. So I would much rather, when I'm in youth serving environments, I'd much rather be in a community where there's structured standards around adult behavior and child behavior, because I think that makes it more crisp and clean and dry, rather than this strange gray zone that I think a lot of the 90s and early aughts reflected in the amount of harm that was done, not only to the children, but to the onlookers who felt that push pull of, should I do something? Should I not do something? Do I risk my role in this community? Do I risk my job in this school? When you started this conversation, a big part of what you shared that I think often gets ignored in these dialogues is, what does a report to this, to a police enforcement or to DFACS or Child Protective Services, what was the ripple effect of that? What's the ripple effect for that individual? And what's the ripple effect for me as a member of this community? And I think so often, and it came across really clearly in your story and your account, that the band director was respected. He was revered. He was looked up to. The theater director was revered, was respected, was looked up to. And these individuals, time and time again, place themselves in roles in which they can gain esteem. And it makes it ever harder for people who maybe notice something strange or off to alert someone else.
Yeah, when you said ripple effect, the first thing I thought was it tends to come back right onto the person who's making the report, right? Like when I could feel right away that I think when you go to report something, your worry becomes, oh, it's going to blow up. Oh my gosh, as soon as I go tell somebody, you imagine these scenarios of the police showing up and arresting a person, and oh my gosh, it's going to be so big. But instead, what happens so often is that nothing happens. And that ends up feeling huge, but in a different way. That ripple of coming back onto you, that now you're even more alone in this because you did what you felt was right. You stepped out on the limb. You sacrificed the relationship. I am thinking right now of a teacher who used to be my friend, someone I consider to be a very close friend, who I reported. And I even went as far as to tell this person, I love you. We've known each other for forever, but something isn't right. And I reported you. And so I have not had any conversations with this person, basically blocked me on social media because they were doing very obvious bad things, very obviously crossing the line with students. And I reported and they've done nothing. And so how does that feel? I think about those kids, and I did it more than once. Like, I mean, it's so heartbreaking that you build yourself up for what you think is going to be this still difficult, terrible scenario where you're going to watch somebody lose their job and the students be upset and all of this stuff. And then something really terrible happens, which is that nothing happens. Is that this person is allowed to stay in the classroom. I mean, students are comfortable putting their head on this man's shoulder randomly. Like, he's built an environment where physical boundaries there's very few. So I watched a student bite this man's shoulder playfully. Like, just put their mouth onto his shoulder. And they do. They just put their head on his, and it's mostly female students, primarily focused on them. I can't, the pain that you feel and the frustration and the anger that you feel, it's the same thing I feel watching what's happening on the national stage today, is that these very obvious, terrible things are happening. And you say to yourself, where are the adults? Because I don't have the power to actually remove. I mean, yes, I can vote. That's true. Like, I mean, that's the power I have, and hopefully still continue to have, But the point is that it has to be the people who are in a position of power to actually do something that have to hold those people accountable. And so it's infuriating and heartbreaking to take the step to do something about it, and then crickets, silence, nothing. So that also is a part, but I have no regret. I have no regret about doing what I did. Yes, you may lose relationships, and yeah, things may get really, really hard, but I never regret doing what I knew was right, or what I believed, after reflection and my own personal experience, that keeping people safe, keeping children who don't have the agency that you do as an adult, keeping them safe has to take priority over other things. It has to. And if we don't believe that's true, then how far are we willing to go as a society to how bad will we let things get? because that's the generation that's going to come up and have to deal with what's about, they're going to then have to deal with this trauma. And if we want a better world for the next generation, then we have to be brave as the adults and we have to make the tough decisions. We have got to learn how to hold people accountable. And we've got to create systems where we feel like we're in it together as a team. We're holding people accountable together as a team. And that takes transparency and discussion and just like we're doing, right? And your willingness to invite people onto your show and to just keep getting the word out there so that we don't feel alone. So that we feel like if I do take this step, that something will happen and that my life won't be destroyed by trying to do the right thing, which so often happens with so many people is they're the ones that end up losing their jobs, losing their communities, needing to move because they've been ostracized because they dared to speak up against this teacher, out against this leader, this whoever who is so loved and revered. And
Yes.
they would rather sacrifice you than do what needs to be done.
That actually makes me think of a question. What was the impact of the court case? I take it that the individual was not working at the school that you attended. Do you know or had you heard about in all your observations of the case as it unfolded in the conviction and sentencing? What was the ripple effect within the school or the community in which he was working at the time that it happened?
Yes. So when he was arrested in Florida and he ended up serving 5 years. His 5 year, he ended up serving a little over 4. And then he was released and now he's actually living back in the state where I live. He lives 90 minutes from me now.
And do you know if he was working at a school at the time that he was arrested?
He was, yeah. He was working at Winter Park in Florida. And so, I mean, this man worked in very prominent districts in Michigan, Walled Lake Northern, Grand Ledge. And I'm saying these out loud because, again, I want, if there's anybody out there that still, I'm the only person that came forward in Michigan, but I know I'm not the only victim. There is no way that in 20, in nearly 20 years or whatever that he was here in Michigan, that it's just me. There's no way, but no one else has come out, and there are all sorts of reasons why that happens, and I would never wanna force a victim of this to have to endure something that they don't want to endure, like the justice system, to have to go through a justice system that can re-traumatize you, but I just want people to know that they're not alone and that I'm here, and that if something has happened or wherever you are, that you are not alone and that I am here. And that if anybody ever wanted to tell me that this man had hurt them, but they didn't want to share that with the world, that is not my place to tell their story because they would be an adult now too. It would be up to them.
For people who may be new to the idea of grooming or predators or like their mind is being blown open by this conversation, I just want to highlight the fact that this predatory band director hopped from school to school to school and state to
Mhm.
state to state. And one thing I think we get lost in the conversation is that we take our micro lived experience, our tiny individual lives, and we think, oh, this is only happening to me. This I don't want to do anything that might ruin this person's life because they've just done it to me. And I think your story so exemplifies the narrative that predators are serial perpetrators. They will go where they are able to access vulnerable children. And this case, even though the individual didn't serve much time in prison, the idea that they are finding and placing themselves in high risk environments like schools is just so crucial to our understanding as adults and as people who are in youth serving environments.
Yes, and I think it's so interesting as a society, we have sayings like, once a cheater, always a cheater. But when it comes to assaulting a child, people are like, oh, I'm sure it's just one. I'm sure they made a mistake. Like, no, that is not how this works. And also, and that the statement of the serial predatory assaulting, that is way more true than the quippy once a cheater, always a cheater, things like that. And I bring that up because if you've read my book, then you understand the damage that occurred. I won't I want to leave some of that. I think when people start the book, they think, oh, this is an abuse story and I know what's going to happen. And then they get to a certain point and go, oh my God, I had no idea that this is where this book was going. And I needed to really be vulnerable and lean into that so people understand the damage and that when you're protecting a child from grooming and abuse, you're not only protecting that child in that moment, you are protecting that child's future. You're protecting them as the future them, their spouse or partner, their children. Because if you don't protect them, you are putting them at risk of re-victimization. You are putting them at risk of never understanding what a healthy versus a toxic relationship looks like. And then they go on to be put in other vulnerable, terrible situations that have even greater consequences as they become adults with jobs and families and children they've given life to. Like it just gets more exponential. The damage gets more exponential. So stopping it as early on as possible is crucial. It is critical.
So that's a wonderful lead in to talking about your incredible memoir, Dissonance. Will you tell us a little bit about the writing process, how you got started in the writing process, and what your goal in your writing was?
I started writing the book in March of 2021. And I was definitely in crisis, severe crisis. And I was afraid of what was going to happen, of what my future was going to look like because of things that had happened since 2019, since that day that I described where I saw that my band director had been arrested. The worst consequences of the abuse showed up after that day. And not to say that there weren't other bad things that were happening. There were, but this is when things really unraveled in my life. And it happened years, decades after it began, after this abusive relationship began. I was, here I am in crisis and I'm sitting at my dining room table and I've got my computer in front of me and I'm just thinking about what is my life going to look like? How am I going to get myself out of this? What am I going to do? Excuse me. We're also in the midst of COVID. I mean, it's just a dark time. It was just a dark time overall. And I thought to myself, if I don't take this energy that's in my body and I don't and use it and like turn it outward and create something that's positive. How do I turn my pain into purpose? It's going to eat me alive. It's going to destroy me. This trauma is going to win. I have to do something dramatic to save myself and my family. And so I'm sitting there and this voice inside me said, "You're going to write your story." And as soon as it happened, I just thought, yep, that's it. I'm going to write a book. It was just like I'd been writing in my journal every day for years and years, but I never thought I'm going to write something that other people are going to see. And frankly, I was very terrified to share what had happened, both in my young life, but especially in my adult life. And I called my husband and I told him, I said, I think I'm going to write a book. I need to share my story. And my husband said, I'm not surprised. He knows me very well. And he's been supportive this entire time. And it's his story too. I mean, it shares some very personal details about his life and about our marriage but all things that are very important to talk about. And he said, whether people know what happened, it's true. It's a true story. You might as well use it to help somebody else. So when I started this memoir, it felt like I was sitting on the floor in front of thousands of these little puzzle pieces that were my life, these pieces of my life. And I'm slowly trying to click pieces together. And I don't know what the picture is going to look like when it's all over, but I just go little by little, okay, this fits together. And how do these pieces of my life add up to where we have arrived today, where we arrived in March of 2021, because I needed to make sense of it for myself. I needed to understand it. I needed to ungroom myself. Like I needed to rewire my brain and body because my body still believed that he loved me. Even after all of that, 2 years after he's arrested, I'm still trapped in this dissonance, this cognitive dissonance of, but yeah, I know it's wrong for a teacher and a student, for that to happen, for a teacher to do that, but it was different for me. And he didn't rape me. That's not true. Like my body, eventually my brain could start to say it. He raped you. He raped you. But my body couldn't believe it. It's sort of like if I asked you to say to yourself that you hate your child, that you clearly love, you could say the words in your brain, but you don't believe that because your body's like, no, I love my child. Why? What are we talking about? And that's how disconnected my brain and body were from each other, that where the logic just, it couldn't line up because of what he had done to me. So I just started, through the writing process, it was very incredible that the more I wrote, the more I made connections, the more I understood. And writing also gave me an outlet to do something healthy, put my energy into doing something like that, as opposed to, substance abuse and other things that I was dealing with. And so it saved me in so many ways. And the more that I wrote about them, it became more about writing a good scene. Like the feelings, it felt so powerful when you start writing it the first however many times. But then you've written it enough, you're familiar with it. It dulls it down. Like what we know about trauma is how to eliminate PTSD is basically you are reintroducing into the body this experience that has been so triggering, but you're doing it in a relaxed body, in a body that is not tense. So you learn to like reassimilate that memory and those things that have happened into a body that is not reacting to. And that's what the writing did for me, is I was able to make it about, I'm going to make this book amazing. I'm going to deliver it in such a way that it will be compelling and it will reach people. And it became about I turned my pain into purpose, into something that where I'm going to help other people. That's what kept me going, so that my purpose would not become, I'm going to continue to be attached to this person. I'm going to continue to feel responsible for him or feel like I love him. All of these things that were absolutely true. That's what Stockholm syndrome is an attachment to your abuser, and it's very real. So I'm just so proud of it. It was published on November 25th, 2024, which is literally like, it is exactly 5 days from when the date of the prologue of the book is. So you open it up and you see Monday, November 25th, 2019, and that's what the prologue. And 5 years later, I published it on Monday, November 25th, 2024. So to me, that's God's way of recycling, you know, um, recycling that pain. And I'm so proud of it. And I know it's hard for people to read and it makes them angry. A lot of people, they get angry. They have described literally throwing the book down on their lap or the table and being mad at me too. And I can empathize with that. But if you don't feel anything about it, then it won't ignite anything in you to want to change something or do something about it. If you feel nothing, then you're not going to want to do anything about it. So get angry about it, have feelings about it, right? But also know I'm angry with you. I'm angry that happened too. But I do not feel shame about it anymore because I know why it happened. I know that this was all a result of abuse and what was happening to me, my beliefs about the world and myself when my brain was developing, and how adults took advantage of that and how that warped my thinking. And so I've had to crawl out of that. Thank God I have the resources to do it. It takes a lot of support, and thankfully I've had it. So people need support in healing from this. So my book is one way is a form of support for people, so that if you have ever experienced this or you know somebody or you're curious about it, it's very raw and very honest. I don't hold back at all because I said to myself, what is the purpose of holding back on this? So you get to see not only how adult Megan is thinking and dealing with this, but I really tried to reach into the mind of teenage Megan. So you can remember what it was like to be a teenager with all these fantasies about what the world is like and what people are like. And yes, I can be in love with my band director and he can be in love with me. These fantasy that now as an adult, I think, oh no, that is not possible. Like an adult, An adult who thinks, a 29-year-old who thinks that they are in love with their 15, 16-year-old student, that is an illness they are suffering. There's a mental defect occurring there. And you know what? If you're willing as the adult to go get help for it, then I don't want to shame you either. Like, that's the thing. It's the people that lean into it and they go, no, I'm going to do this. But if you're having those thoughts, it doesn't, teachers can feel attraction to their students. I will say that. Like, and as in, you can be an adult and you can look at a high school student and know that they are physically attractive. You can recognize that they have attractive qualities. You can recognize that they're smart or they're funny, that they have a great energy about them. There is nothing wrong with that for you recognizing that, but there is something wrong when that turns into you're thinking about them in a sexual way, in a way where you feel physical attraction to them, which is different than just recognizing as an adult, just as you would with a child if you think that's a beautiful child. But that's different than having attraction to that child. And if you're having those feelings, you need to get help, but you need to get yourself away from that child because you may try to convince yourself, oh, but we're in love. Oh, but clearly that student likes that is not love. So I know that's going down a pretty deep, dark rabbit hole there. But as a teacher, I feel like I can speak to that. That I think that's something a lot of people don't want to say, or maybe are not willing to say, is just that admitting that, yes, you can recognize that your students are attractive or that they have attractive qualities. That it does not make you a bad person. But something is wrong when you begin to fantasize about that child or imagine that child in a role beyond you being a caretaker for that child. Then there is something wrong with that.
I think that's a really important, honest conversation, and that you have a natural affinity to certain personalities that you may find more connection with, even in a youth serving environment. So recognizing that we should have structure in place so that isolation and favoritism and forbidden fruits are not even on the table for those sorts of dynamics to be built, and that a lot of this can be thwarted through structure and through standards within communities and schools and youth serving agencies. Where can people find Dissonance for all the listeners who will want to go out and read it? I've had the pleasure of reading it and it is outstanding. And I communicated that to you after I got done reading it. And I think it's just so important that we have more and more testimonies like yours. So where can people find Dissonance?
First off, thank you so much I just want you to know how much I appreciate you because just that you took the time to read my book, and it was such an incredible thing to know about you and about your book, and then to have you show interest in what I was doing and to support me. And I'm so grateful, and I appreciate you saying that it's great, that you think it's a great book, and it's winning awards, which is awesome. It's won 2 awards, a Writer's Digest award and an Indies award, and so that's really exciting because it makes me feel like, yeah, like I put like I'm being rewarded for that work, or that people are recognizing the work that I've put in. And also, when you win awards and those things happen, the goal is to get the book into the hands of as many people that need it as possible. So that creates exposure. So to answer your question, you can really find Dissonance on anywhere books are sold online. So you can, Amazon is like the easiest one if you have an Amazon account. If you are someone who has stepped away from Amazon, you can easily find it. Like, you just literally put Dissonance, a memoir, Megan Farison, and you're going to find lots of options for where to purchase it. So I have a website if you want to connect with me personally, and that's meganfarison.com. I do have an Instagram account. I deactivated my Facebook account because it's just so chaotic on that platform. Like, I had to limit myself on social media. So I do have an Instagram. So people can find me if they want to, but I just encourage them to, it's a lot, take breaks if you try to read it. And if you can only do it in chunks, I totally understand. But if you have any connection, any tie to this subject, and you want to know, you know, the raw truth about it, and the potential long-term damage and severity of damage that can occur from this, and why it's so important to stop it. And we can stop it. It is 100% preventable within an educational setting because there are other people watching. That's different than a home environment, which is much more isolated and more difficult to deal with. But certainly within a school environment, there are people around that are, and it's about a pattern, like you were talking about earlier. We all make mistakes. We do things that we look back and go, I should have done this differently. With people who are predatory, there is a pattern of behavior that they are exhibiting, and it is observable. So, if you want to know more about how that works, please buy Dissonance wherever books are sold online.
I'm just so excited to watch you bloom. And one of the points that we started with during this conversation was the need for recognition from the adults within the school setting, which made it easier for the theater director and the band director. And I think about how full your spirit must be getting the sort of recognition from your incredible writing ability and for sharing your story so honestly. Thank you to the work that you did to put that story out into the minds of survivors and the people who work in this profession on the prevention side, because it really is a prevention story. And what we can all take away from that certainly enhances the work that we're all doing to prevent this from happening to other children and within other family systems. As we close, what is something that you would like listeners to know that maybe hasn't come up yet in our conversation, or something that you'd like to specifically highlight in light of where you find yourself right now in this moment?
Thinking about my mom right now because she is having to deal with a lot of regret that she didn't do something, because now, of course, it is so obvious to her, it is so clear to her that she should have, but she didn't, and she couldn't back then. She only was equipped with what she was equipped with at the time. And I think the ability to forgive yourself for what you didn't know. Um in my author's note in the book, I say, whatever's been done to you, or whatever you've whatever you've done, or whatever's been done to you, if you're struggling to separate the two, then you're not alone. Because when you're in a society or around in an environment where people are manipulating you on purpose, you do start to wonder, how much of that was me? How much of that was my choice? Was it really my choice? Did I really mean to do that? And to just give yourself the space and the grace to say, I only knew what I knew back then. And now, today, I'm willing to grow and I'm willing to face my past with compassion and honesty so that I don't make these same choices, or I don't lose my agency to people that are robbing me of these choices, because that's a very real thing. That I will surround myself with people that are healthy for me, and that I will do the work necessary to heal myself so that I don't pass this trauma on to other people, so that I can be strong enough to stand up for the vulnerable when the time comes, if and when the time comes. So just give yourself that space and grace and know that you are loved, that nothing has happened in your life, whether it's happened to you or that you did something that makes you unworthy of love and forgiveness. Like, find the space to forgive yourself.
Megan, I think that is such a beautiful note to end on. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your writing, for the book Dissonance, and for spending your morning with us today to share your testimony and your story.
Thank you so much.